Hi everyone, and welcome to video number 23 on USA conflicts 1954 to 1975. And this video, ladies and gentlemen, is about a key event and major turning points in the conflict in Vietnam, which occurred in 1968. In the previous two videos, we've looked at, first of all, the Vietcong tactics, fighting a guerrilla war, hit and run tactics. And then we studied the US tactics, ABC, air power, battles, inflicting casualties. For example, they wanted to use chemical weapons, search and destroy. And we'd seen that both of those sides, both of those tactics had actually brought about a stalemate. Neither side could yet land a decisive blow. And what we're going to have a look at today is maybe the start of the decisive blow, the start of the turning point, 1968. So that's what this video is all about. Now then, ladies and gentlemen, well, hey, it's party time. Should old acquaintance be forgot and never brought to mind? Sorry about the terrible singing, but well, hey, it's party time. December the 31st, January the 1st, New Year's Eve, New Year's Day. Everybody on public holiday, everyone has a party. Hooray! But in Vietnam, New Year isn't the end of December. It's the end of January, ladies and gentlemen. And as we're going to see, for some reason, that plays a part. Because the Vietcong have been planning a huge attack to take place over the Vietnamese New Year, the end of January 1968. And this plan for this huge attack, attacking over 100 towns and cities, was called the Tet Offensive. T-E-T, the Tet Offensive. Now, in the pre-planning before the attack, this is what the Vietcong, the communists, wanted to do. They were trying to catch the Americans and the South Vietnamese Army, the ARVN. They were trying to catch them off guard. First of all, in previous New Years, January 65, 66, 67, there tended to be a ceasefire at that time because of the public holiday. Many of the ARVN troops were on holiday. They were on leave. That's why maybe the Vietcong have picked this date. Now, in late 1967, here's our map of Vietnam again. Up here near the border, the 17th parallel, can you just see that arrow there? A demilitarized zone. Well, in late 67, the Vietcong attacked here. It was part of their pre-planning, because what they wanted to do was get the American soldiers to move to the demilitarized zone, which was going to be away from when they would then attack for the Tet Offensive. Quite a clever move, ladies and gentlemen. The Vietcong and North Vietnam had also made tentative suggestions, beginning to suggest that maybe we might negotiate for peace. We've had some heavy losses recently. Maybe we need to end the war. This was a trick, ladies and gentlemen. It was a ruse to try and catch the Americans off guard. They wanted the Americans to think, oh look, North Vietnam's ready to give in. It wasn't. It was all a trick leading up to the Tet Offensive. And just 10 days before, on the 20th of January 68, North Vietnamese troops attacked the American base at Khe Sar. And what did they do, ladies and gentlemen? Westmoreland, the leader of the American army, had to send 6,000 troops to help defend it. So, what we see, all of these points meant that the Vietcong attack, when they attacked on their New Year, 30th of January, 31st of January 1968, the Tet Offensive had come as a complete shock. It had the element of surprise because it was their new year. Just take that off. Oh, that's better. So, what actually happened in the Tet Offensive? It was a huge attack. Over 80,000 Vietcong troops were involved, attacking over 100 towns and cities across South Vietnam. All the way down here, right the way down to Saigon, ladies and gentlemen. At first, the Tet Offensive was successful because it had the element of surprise. The Americans were not ready because it was New Year. But gradually, the Americans regrouped. It was a big change for the Vietcong. Normally they used hit and run, but now they are fighting direct battles. That's what America wanted all along. So gradually America would say, right, they're fighting our sort of war now. Maybe we can do some damage. Now I've mentioned Saigon, right the way down here. Capital city down in South Vietnam. 4,500 Vietcong troops attacked, including 15 in a so-called suicide squad, which actually attacked the United States Embassy and got into the American Embassy compound. Now, all of this was captured live on television, shown back on the screens of millions and millions of Americans. I'll come back to that later in this video. The suicide squad in the American Embassy held out for 5 hours before they were destroyed. The 4,500 troops in Saigon held out for 2 days before they were destroyed. Many of these towns and cities that were attacked, gradually over the next few days, the next few weeks, the Americans recaptured them all. Why? Because they were able to fight their war, use their power, use their weapons, use their might, use their extra men. It was the sort of war that they'd wanted to fight all along. Up here, the ancient city of Hue, right there, just below the demilitarized zone. The ancient city of Hue, that one held out for 25 days. The city was destroyed by the air power, the bombing from the Americans. But eventually, all the towns and the cities were recovered. The Tet Offensive, 1968, was over. Huge Viet Cong losses. They were virtually wiped out as a fighting force. Now, at the start of the video, I said that there was a key event, a turning point coming. Well, that's it. The Tet Offensive. So that's fairly simple. That's fairly straightforward. The Tet Offensive was a huge military defeat for the communists. Therefore, it's a victory for the Americans. America's going to go on and win the Vietnam War because of the failure of the Tet Offensive. Done. Excellent. Next video. No. But no, ladies and gentlemen, we have to look in a bit more detail. Let's examine the different groups involved in the Vietnam War and look at it in a bit more detail. Because on the surface, yes, the Tet Offensive was a communist military defeat. But something else came into the situation. Let's have a little look what that is. Now I'm going to, for the final part of the video, examine the three different. Number 2, North Vietnam, and then I'll finish with USA. Well, let's have a look at South Vietnam. The Tet Offensive, the ARVN fought quite well. They had some severe casualties. They lost 3,000 in the city of Hue, for example, but they fought well. So that's a positive for them. In the Tet Offensive, the North Vietnamese were hopeful that once they attacked, the people in South Vietnam would rise up in revolution, overthrow the government, and join the communists. That was the aim of the Viet Cong, but it did not happen. So that was a positive for South Vietnam. So there's two positives from the Tet Offensive. On the other side, though, if the ARVN fought very well in the Tet Offensive, some of the South Vietnamese leaders were afraid that America might think, well, you've done well there, you can manage, we are now going to pull out. So that was a worry for them. And even though the people didn't rise in revolt and join the communists, people were very unhappy that its government in the South had failed to protect them. They regarded their towns and cities as safe places, particularly Saigon. And yet, they were attacked in Saigon, and they'd had to make do with war in their cities. So that's South Vietnam. What about the North Vietnam? Militarily, the Tet Offensive was a failure. There is no doubt about that. There were huge Vietcong losses, thousands and thousands of their best fighters. They were almost virtually wiped out as a fighting force. The people in South Vietnam did not rise and join their fight against the Americans. So you can argue that in some ways, for the communists, the Tet Offensive was not a very good outcome. But on the other side, think about this. Yes, the Viet Cong in the south have been destroyed. That meant now that Hanoi, up in North Vietnam, it was now North Vietnam that was going to be in total control of the Vietnam War against the Americans. Secondly, they could rebuild their forces. Yes, they'd lost many men in the Tet Offensive, but they had the possibility of rebuilding. Remember, time was on their side. It was their country. They were going nowhere. They would continue the struggle. And the other thing about North Vietnam, somehow they were able to use the Tet Offensive as a massive propaganda boost, a massive propaganda victory. Now, how could they do that if it was a defeat militarily? The answer lay in America and the reaction to what people had seen on their TV screens in the Tet Offensive. The reaction back in America allowed North Vietnam to claim a propaganda victory. So, what was this reaction? What was going on back in the United States of America? Let's have a look at the Americans then. First of all, the army. Some members of the army said, look, if we just send some more troops, we can win the war. We've had a big victory here. The Tet Offensive has failed. We just need to send more troops and we will win the Vietnam War. Other people in the American army thought, look, no, that's not true. Now is the time for us to withdraw. Now is the time for us to pull out because the ARVN fought well. They've shown that they can manage, so we now need to leave. So there's a bit of a disagreement there in the army. A decision needed to be made. Second group in America, the politicians. Now, some politicians were reacting to the general public, and an anti-war feeling was growing in America, and this was then represented in Congress, in their government. And they began to say, some of the politicians, look, no more money. We are not going to send and spend more dollars. For example, 1968, America spent $26 billion in Vietnam. They had over 500,000 troops there, almost 17,000 of whom came back in body bags. That idea of General Westmoreland, the body count. Well, the American public did not really want to see this. The effect was so great that President Johnson decided in 1968, after the Tet Offensive, President Johnson decides not to run in the presidential election campaign of that year. He said, no, I think I'm too unpopular because of what has happened in Vietnam. I am not going to try to carry on and be the next president. So things were changing in America. And that leads us finally to the public, the general public. Well, many of the American people felt that their government, their politicians, their president had cheated, had lied to them, saying, oh, look, this war's going to be easy to win. We're the most powerful nation on the planet. We're fighting a group of people who can barely do anything. We're going to win easily. Therefore, it was a huge shock to the national psyche. The people in America had a huge shock when they watched on their television screens people, their enemy, the Vietcong fighters, inside the United States Embassy. People are beginning to think back in America, look, we've been lied to. This war is unwinnable. As a result of that, there was a huge rise in people opposed to the Vietnam War. And it was that, ladies and gentlemen, which was the real key point, the real key turning point of the Tet Offensive. Finally, back in America, there's a movement growing, building, saying, look, maybe we need to get out of Vietnam. And that begins to change things. Now, as I said, Johnson made the decision not to try to be the next president, not to carry on. He withdrew from the presidential election campaign. But there was still a presidential election campaign in '68. Who became the next president? And what would that president do for America in Vietnam? That was the next key point. And that, of course, is in the next video. As ever, I hope it's been useful. All the best now. I'll see you soon.